Today, it's our pleasure to have with us Semyon Dukach of One Way Ventures. He is the founding partner of One Way Ventures, which is based primarily outside of the Boston area. He was formerly the managing director of TechStars in Boston, where he helped countless startups grow and succeed. And prior to TechStars, he was a prolific angel investor with as many as 100 personal investments. And before that, he was an entrepreneur who had founded multiple tech companies. And finally, one of my favorite, he was a professional blackjack player, so I'm sure we're going to discuss that at some point. Semyon, it's great to have you with us today. Maybe we can start with you telling us a little bit about your firm and what it's all about.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me. At One Way Ventures, we invest at the seed stage into immigrant founders. So companies started by people who moved to the US from other countries, because we know that those people are relentless. They just have the drive, and they are basically unstoppable. They ended up creating already the majority of all the unicorns, and I think that'll continue. So that's what we do. We are currently investing out $56 million fund too.
Excellent. And how did you, zone in on that opportunity set, the immigrants?
Well, I have been an investor for a long time. Years and years ago, I realized that I'm a better investor than entrepreneur. I prefer serving startup founders, right, as my people, as my customers. And I like being involved in multiple companies at the same time. I just found myself as an angel investor, essentially. And over the years, ended up running a TechStars accelerator, and then wanted to start a fund. And I knew it would be a fund with some sort of purpose or mission, for the same reason that any company, I think, ought to have a purpose or a mission besides just making money. It just makes things work better, right? It helps you motivate the team. It clarifies your thinking. It's a good way to set things up, and you end up ultimately doing better, I think, if you're driven by something. So I knew that, and I guess I was thinking of various things that it could be, but the reality is, like, I am an immigrant. My network has a lot of immigrants in it, and I really care about issues around immigration and just the general notion of equality of opportunity, right, as a human right. The idea that the random circumstances of your birth shouldn't impact, things you can do, and you should be able to build a business or get a job, for that matter, anywhere you like, in my opinion. So I guess with these beliefs, the specific moment where I thought of it was in early 2014, when I had already given notice to TechStars. I was wrapping up my last accelerator program in Boston, and I guess Donald Trump was just elected for the first time.
That would be 2016, right?
Yeah, he was elected in 2016, but the inauguration was in January of 2017. And I think I was just starting my last program, and one of the founders was Canadian, but I think was actually born in Syria, but like as an infant was brought to Canada. And this, like, one of the first policies in the first days of the Trump administration, they imposed like a total ban of people who were born in several countries, including Syria, on entering the US, even though like he had his visas and everything was all set, right? At the airport, they actually turned them around. But I think even aside from that incident, I found myself, like many other people, like Sergey Brin, and many others, I found myself at an airport with a sign jumping up and down, yelling things, which I haven't done that since I was in college, really, right? And somebody, one of the, I guess, mentors and investors around the TechStars program, named Joe Caruso, observed this behavior in me, and knowing I was thinking of starting a fund with some sort of mission, he actually suggested the idea to start a fund to back immigrant founders.
So what's the trajectory like, being, prolific angel investor to then running your own fund? I think a lot of angel investors, once you have a certain track record, decide, okay, why don't I go ahead and institutionalize that? I'd love to hear from your perspective. What was that experience like, and what might be, some of the non-obvious things that play into that?
for me, it wasn't kind of the path that you're hinting at. I was born in the Soviet Union. Like, we were refugees. I fundamentally am have an anti-establishment, let's say, non-conformational bias, right? Just as a person, as a personality. And I thought I loved being an angel. I was fortunate to have done well enough early enough that I had recycled capital many times, and I didn't feel like I needed to have a lavish lifestyle. So I felt like I could keep doing it forever. I'd actually made closer to 200, I think, investments altogether. And I was getting better at actually making an impact, right? Helping the founders, reputation was growing, deal flow was improving, really improving. You always think you have good deal flow until you realize that there's better stuff out there, but it was improving. I was just shocked when the people running TechStars approached me and asked me to take over one of their strongest programs, which was Boston. They sort of asked me to do it. It was out of the blue. It wasn't really a job. It felt more like a franchise because it had its own fund with its own like LPs in Boston, and they offered me control of the program and most of the carry, most of the economics. Right, I just compensated them a little bit for using the brand in the back office, basically, and so it was just very surprising and I don't know. It was a good offer for me. I was grateful, and so I tried it. And in doing that, I learned about VCs. Like, I had to help a lot of these companies all at the same stage, right? At them when they raise money, you just naturally get to know the ecosystem and kind of realize that some of these VCs are pretty awesome. Actually, they didn't all suck. A lot of them did suck in some ways, but yeah, that's kind of how I became more open to it. And then when I wanted to set up something of my own, I didn't like TechStars had a pretty cool mission, but it wasn't like my top mission, which was developing the local ecosystems, such as Boston. I like Boston, but it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life too. So that's how I came to it. I didn't know a lot of the blocking and tackling. I never worked in another VC fund, right? I had a lot of gaps, and fortunately, I was able to build up a team that filled those gaps.
What do you think are some of the preconceived notions that founders, particularly first-time founders, might have about VCs?
Well, the biggest preconceived notion is that they're going to give them a term sheet, right? Like, by default, and that when the first rejections are always unpleasant and surprising and difficult to accept, right? There's many other preconceived notions. People anchor too much on round size, valuation, things like that, right? They celebrate getting the term sheet or closing the round, instead of actually growing the business. I guess a lot of founders just don't understand that it really is very much about the match. Like, if a VC rejects you, if they reject you, then chances are that if they were not to reject you, you should not take the money, right? Like, it's a question of fit rather than anointing you to some.
Right.
It's not a checkbox saying that you're awesome, even though there might be some press implying that. You have to ignore the press and realize it's just a question of fit. And of course, the best companies don't need to take VC money, right? They don't need to sell equity. So you sell it because you have to, not because it's a goal in of itself.
Going back to kind of when you started One Way, and obviously you have to pitch LPs, potential LPs, etc. What was that like? Because obviously you're taking the position of supporting a sell to a lot of the early stage funds, focus on a specific vertical, right? And get to know that vertical. It sounds like you're, maybe we can talk about the areas of focus for your fund, but it sounds that it's a broader focus. So what was that like experience? Did you have to sell people into the thesis, or did they easily recognize that immigrants can be great entrepreneurs?
We'll talk about verticals. We do have some vertical focus areas that are more per partner rather than for the fund as a whole. But we invest in the early stages, and the early stages, the single most important factor in the investment decision is the founder, the group of founders, and especially the core CEO, the person who is doing the raising, the person who is recruiting and inspiring the rest of the team. And it sort of makes sense to have an initial filter that filters for type of person, right? before even vertical or anything else. It's just the most important thing, right? But it's not just a filter that selects particularly strong people, right? Not because people from those countries are stronger than people who were born here. It's because the people who moved, who've gone through, right, and figured things out, that filters out particularly exceptional people. And of course, among them, we try to select the very best ones. But it's a great starting point. And then, but the flip side of it is that it's an affinity group. It helps unite our people, our network around ideas and identity, right? Like, I'm not just a guy who is American from the Soviet Union, who's like a few other things. I'm also part of this much larger community of people who've moved, who immigrated. And that catalyzes all the relationship. It helps me to get our CEOs to help each other, to get to raise money from LPs, as you mentioned, to get other VCs to remember who we are and to know who to refer to us, right? It's just generally a powerful idea around which to build a fund franchise. And it motivates us internally, right? Like, the team is all immigrants, of course, and the vision, the mission, I guess, keeps us working harder as well. And so you asked me about raising the first fund. Yeah, I mean, it was harder than I maybe expected it to be, since I didn't know what I was getting into. I talked to a few institutions. It was easy to get the meetings, and it wasn't easy to get like an institutional anchor quickly. And I certainly had no interest in spending a couple of years trying to do that, as I guess some people might. So we ended up just, it took maybe from about June to October, maybe 5 or 6 months. It took me, and I had another partner at the time, to raise Fund 1, and we didn't raise the whole thing. Fund 1 was 28 million, but we had the first closing of 17 million and did the other 11 later. So yeah, it was challenging, but we got almost 100 people, entrepreneurs, people who maybe had immigrant grandparents, and our story reminded them of how they were, or just generally people who understood the story. And yeah, it probably also helped us that some of these policies in the early days of the Trump administration were not very friendly towards immigrants and not very well thought through. I think because that energized people around that issue. It was a lot of awareness. But also I did have a track record, right? I had, I guess the TechStars track record was still quite early, and there was some markups, but there were no exits yet. And now those TechStars funds have, I think, returned like over 2.5 times already the invested capital, and I still have a lot to go. But at the time, they didn't have much. But my angel portfolio had an extensive, track record of exits, liquidity. But of course, we know that it's very different than a VC fund. So anyway, that's what it was, and we raised it, and we started investing. Learned a lot, made some mistakes, but got the thesis right, and really have been strengthening the team and doubling down on the core immigrant thesis.
You mentioned, backing exceptional founders, right? Like how do you guys define that? What goes into it? And then what other criteria is most important to you as you evaluate prospective portfolio companies and founders? Yeah,
well, we have like 5 people on the investment committee now, and we look at, we break down founder strength by a number of, things we measure. And even, for instance, even the immigrant story will sort of rate the strength of it. Like, okay, we want the CEO ideally to be the immigrant, not some minority co-founder. We've learned that it's a better fit. We're more likely to be able to help more. It's just a better fit for us. We want it to be someone who didn't come as a young child, but ideally came on their own. And we've actually honed it down further. Like more recently, like towards the later years of our fund too, we've actually rejected applicants simply because the immigrant CEO was already successful before they moved over. So they were like an expat. They didn't go into like a one-way journey without knowing anything what's going to happen next, right? Only knowing they must succeed, they cannot go back. Like it wasn't like that, right? They had the opportunity to check things out, maybe if they already had a business or whatever, and they might move it if it gets funded. And so that's not really a fit for us either. That's a different thesis, like moving companies to the more attractive capital environment or better market in the US. It's cool. I actually did some of that at TechStars. I moved some existing companies over and played around with things like that. But yeah, our thesis is around the person and trying to have the immigration experience be predictive of their struggles in building a large disruptive business. But anyway, we look at other factors. Obviously, probably the second most important thing besides the team is and of course there's many other attributes of the person besides the immigrant stuff, right? Like all the standard ones, right?
And it sounds like obviously the immigrant story is more heavily weighted as it should be, given the focus of the fund. But what are kind of, to your point about other factors being important about a founder and predicting success, like what would you say are the top?
The founder market fit, like having some sense of the market, understanding the customer need, having a real passion for what they're doing, right? Having their own sense of purpose, which is very separate from ours. The ability to tell a story, right? A vision of the future. They have to really see how things are going to be. It has to be a pretty strong vision. They have to listen well, but they definitely shouldn't be agreeing with too much of what we suggest right away. So thoughtfulness, right? And then they have to have created some of these other aspects that VCs want. It has to be a large opportunity, of course. A large market is very important, right? We do believe in the power of law. We are looking for every single check to be a possible fund returner, like many investors. And so it needs to be a large potential market. And we want something defensible, something differentiated, right? Something unique. And many other things, but those are the kind of the top criteria.
Not immediately agreeable is an interesting one, because I think it kind of hits on the point of wanting someone who's very kind of independent in their thought process and their vision,
right? Believes
in that, fully. So, talk to us a little bit about the Pathfinder Collective that you started as well.
Yeah, so this is an initiative that my partner Eugene Malabrovsky, who is in Silicon Valley, started last year. And, I mentioned we have a lot of LPs who are entrepreneurs, who are individuals, who occasionally can really help some of our companies. And we have a broader extended network. And especially, I haven't mentioned yet, but when we raised the second fund, we ended up doing it from individual investors as well. And there was a lot more people, and that came together very quickly and got oversubscribed. It was easy time to raise at the time. But anyway, that's a $57 million fund. But we felt like we wanted to have another layer to our network that were even people with even more success, let's say, who are generally hard to get a hold of. And so, but Eugene was very good in general at meeting lots and lots of founders. He had spent 17 years building a pretty big business in consumer VPNs with hundreds of millions of users prior to joining us at OneWay. He, I guess, picked a goal for himself, like a stretch goal to have 25 founders of unicorn, like multi-billion-dollar companies who would join the collective and commit some hard time to help our portfolio, and they'd get benefits mainly from networking with each other, seeing our companies, being a part of the whole story, right? The immigrant mission also enabled him to get so many people to sign up, and he got 25 of them in 1 year. So that's the Pathfinder Collective. Some amazing names there, as you can see from the website. Really cool people.
And what about the focus of the fund? What areas are you focused on, and what is your thesis?
Well, the overall thesis, like I said, is backing the most exceptional top immigrant founders. The verticals that we like, they are per partner, and they change from time to time. So I've done a lot of AI historically. I'm doing actually a little bit less now that it's a little overheated, but still doing some. because I have a background in computer science. Like before my own startup, before Blackjack, right? I studied computer science and built various interesting things and published papers and whatnot. It was long ago, but it's enough to make me gravitate towards the harder software problems. And my partner Lex has done some very interesting fintech investments, as well as Leo on our team. Like Chipper Cash is one company that's built a pretty big consumer payments, mobile money business all over Africa and a bunch of countries in Africa, though it's based in San Francisco by African immigrants in San Francisco. So we've done a bunch of stuff around supply logistics, SaaS of various types. And then since doing a bunch of AI, I've most gravitated to deep tech. So I'm like the only guy on the team that looks at various like hardware, heavy, hard problems. So within deep tech, it's like robotics and space. So we have like 3 or 4 investments four investments in space technologies, various things to do with outer space.
Do you want to pick a couple of companies maybe in, I don't know, AI or fintech or whatever you want, and just tell us, give us a little bit of the sense of how did you meet the entrepreneur? What was it that drew you to the business, and then where it is, what they're doing?
Yeah, they all vary, right? There's a bunch of them, of course. Some of them are more successful already, higher profile than others. The one I mentioned was Chipper Cash. That one was actually driven by a thesis that Lex had around peer-to-peer payments in developing countries. So he was an immigrant from China, and though he grew up in Louisiana since he was a kid, he follows developments over there and saw like the vast amount of impact and disruption from the WeChat ecosystem, payment system, right? And so he looked at Brazil and other areas. And there's reasons why in the US, like Venmo wouldn't grow to be as big a company at the time, as WeChat did. And so he formed a thesis, and I think even though he wasn't even a full partner yet, like he was a principal, and he had plenty of work to do on the deals that I was bringing, but he found the time to like look at a bunch of accelerators and other sorts of deal flow, and identified this Chipper Cash company at 500 startups, and actually was out there. I went to the demo day, and we didn't lead it. There was another fund called Decience that led the first round, but we would like join them. We were the second biggest check in the first round of the company. So that's how that one came about. But others, they come from other founders. A lot of like my existing portfolio founders from TechStars or before, or at this point from Fund One, from other VCs, from accelerators, all the various, the network, basically. The Pathfinders sent us deal flow.
Are there trends around where immigrants are coming off? I mean, if you go to the West Coast, there's obviously a very strong Indian immigrant tech community, right, that has driven kind of innovation.
Yeah.
But Africa is also up and coming, right? We have a couple of investments actually in businesses that are doing business in Africa. So how do you think, is that something that you think about or not really?
Broad distribution of countries. I think we have over 50 countries at this point represented between the two funds. Out of like 70 companies, there are founders from 50 different countries. And often several in the same company, right? There's co-founders from different countries, but it's very much a long tail. There are more, of course. There's the awesome Indian mafia, right, and an Israeli mafia, for that matter, on the West Coast, and not only in the West Coast, but immigrants from other countries maybe have less of a core community. So what we offer is merging them, even to an Israeli founder that has a lot of support. From VCs focused on just Israelis, right, moving from Tel Aviv or whatever to San Francisco, and similar funds that in the Indian American ecosystem. They still understand that collectively it's a much more powerful group, right? They get it. Like for one thing, we can offer to merge those two, right, the two biggest ones. We can reach into either. We have a bunch from the former Soviet Union. like in Latin America, for example, I think Venezuela plays way above its class for the obvious reason that it's particularly important to leave the place, when it's had more trouble than other countries, right? So sometimes people, if you were to look at like the number of tech successful founders or VCs or any sort of successful people like from that country, there'll be a higher proportion, right, relative to population than from other nearby countries. So there's a little bit of that. But yeah, I mean, natural concentrations of deal flow where you already have it. And beyond that, it's a long tail.
And what was the most recent deep tech company that you funded?
Oh, there's one they're trying to close on. I'll have to hold off on talking about that one. That's a deep tech company. The what have we done in deep tech? InStock, which is warehouse robotics. That's a Ukrainian founder, but that's a couple of years now. Really cool company though. Robots that drive on the ceiling. It's amazing.
Wow. Okay.
It's Odyssey Spaceworks. It's fairly recent. That's only about a year old, and I think they actually about to preempt their next full seed round, but that was a pre-seed check. So I think that's fairly new, and that's about as deep as it gets. They're doing biological experiments in outer space.
Wow.
And doing it really well. Like, it's really incredible. Like the pre-seed round was $500,000 like, total.
Yeah.
And they actually launched to customers in orbit and got revenues, right? And helped them run experiments, like micro experiments, and like rather than having people on the space station for huge amounts of money, like do it manually, they have tiny little containers that spin and set temperature, pressure, to your liking, and allow organisms to grow, and then have a bunch of sensors send data back to Earth. And it's all modular now. Like this is all of the thesis. It's just all enabled by the lower cost of launch from SpaceX, from these huge aggregated flights, and that's only going to keep dropping as they go to bigger and bigger spaceships. Like the Starship spaceships are going to drop it even further.
Do they know that you're preempting, or are we breaking some news here?
Oh yeah. No, that part is the company knows, but it's going
to come out.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think they've announced some. They've had some press.
By the time this podcast comes out, there won't be an issue.
I'd love to be breaking news.
Yeah. I'm not too concerned. They've had some press. It's a cool company. It's not just us. There's people following us, and it's a good seed round. Yeah. And they're planning a bunch of launches for next year, so they're racing to fund those. But my point was just like, how do you spend $500,000, right, to support a team and actually launch things into space and have it all work, right? Like, I mean, it's space, it's hard, but sometimes that's what I mean by extraordinary teams. They end up doing extraordinary things, right? That seem implausible. Right.
What is it that you love the most about that particular, like deep tech in general?
I mean, I guess I've always kind of liked physics and science fiction and whatnot, but it's hard, of course. Sometimes it's very capital intensive, so for space in particular, there's a small subset of space companies that we can actually back where we see a path, right? Where we have confidence that they'll be able to raise the capital they need on good enough terms in the future.
Yep.
Why do I like deep tech? It tends to be defensible. There's some technical risk, but then if you can build it, it's a little bit easier to sell, let's say.
Right.
Yep. I feel like everything is risky. SaaS can be a much easier business to build, but then when you realize that the cost of customer acquisition is climbing because someone else is, advertising in the same channels, like there's its own challenges, or you got a lot of competitors. So I actually think you could make money investing in almost any vertical, whether or not the business itself is easy to build or hard to build.
Right.
And you have to look at the specifics, and sometimes it's good to be a little contrarian.
What particular vertical do you guys see kind of the most deal flow in, as of late?
I think just the ones I mentioned, like AI, various kinds of deep tech, general SaaS, and I would say it's a bit of a concentration around supply chain, logistics, transportation, e-commerce. There's a little bit of a concentration there as well, but I think that's more organic. I mean, all these things are organic. Like as an angel, I didn't make investments in space. I've always loved it. I found it fascinating, but my first one was early in our fund one, and then one leads to the other, right? You build a network, and you look at more stuff, and yeah. Now I'm actually looking more at not just outer space, but defense tech, right? There's an overlay aerospace companies, the large ones, tend to do both defense and civilian. And so some startups do that as well. So we've been looking at more of those. Though haven't invested yet, but we've been spending a lot of time there.
Switching gears for a second, let's talk a little bit about your personal background. I mean, you alluded to you being a refugee from the former Soviet Union. When did you tell us that story? And I also want to learn about how you became a professional blackjack player, because that sounds like a lot of fun.
The immigration story is my parents' story, really. We came in 1979. I was only 10 years old. And yeah, it was a one-way ticket. They had no information about the world outside the Soviet Union. I mean, none whatsoever.
So how were they able to move out? Because at that point, I don't think you were free to, travel anywhere, right?
Yeah, there was a program that was negotiated by actually folks in the Carter administration, whom I later got to meet, that allowed some number of like ethnically Jewish or German people in the Soviet Union to leave the country for like reunification post World War II. I don't know. Actually, as far as I know, they were literally traded for a bunch of wheat. There was like certain number of ships full of grain in exchange for certain numbers of people that got, I don't know, to take a more cynical view, the Jewish American lobby in the U.S. delivered so many votes to Jimmy Carter's election campaign in exchange for so many heads that were supposed to get out. Honestly,
Wow.
like I think it was something like that. I don't know the exact details, but I'm very grateful. But what it looked like to us was basically my parents were declared to be like traitors of their homeland, and everyone they knew almost turned away from them. They had to liquidate everything they had, and they couldn't take anything with them. I think we were allowed to take $100 total for the family, and no documents. Like you surrendered your passport.
Wow.
It was a one-way ticket into the void, right? Like really. And then we were there were not nonprofits that were helping, right? And we got aid, we got some housing. We were in Vienna a couple of weeks, and then near Rome, Italy, for 2 months, during which time we got like political asylum status in the U.S. and came to Newark, New Jersey, lived in the project, and miraculously my dad got a job in Houston, Texas, in the oil industry, and so then we had a kind of a middle-class lifestyle in Houston for a couple of years until he lost his job, and then we were poor again. But that was the start. After that, pretty much American dream.
Right, and then you went into undergrad, and then you did some graduate work also at MIT, right, with in computer science. So that's what kind of took you through technology, basically, and into the technology ecosystem.
Yeah, I liked computers from the start. I liked video games. I got a Commodore 64 when it first came out.
Oh, sure.
It's like the first thing of value that I ever had, built some early virtual reality systems actually at IBM Research in the summers when I was at Columbia. That's my summer job. And then at MIT, I was working on like the very first payment protocol, like to move money over the internet through like intermediary banks, kind of like a PayPal.
Got it.
Got distracted a little bit with this blackjack team, didn't finish the PhD, turned it into a master's and just played blackjack. And
is that right? So tell us a little bit about that, because I'm dying to know. Is that like the card counter team that we all have seen in the movies?
Yeah. So that's the one. Yeah, I sold the rights to the story to Ben Mesrick, who resold it to Kevin Spacey for the movie, and there was a bunch of documentaries and whatnot. Story's been told, but it was cool. We did something that most people thought couldn't be done.
Did you make real money in the process? I mean, was it worth it to?
No, not at all. No, we only made like $4 or $5 million. It was absolutely not worth it financially. No, it wasn't. It was small money, but like it was a bunch of people, several years. Believe me, it was not even close to being worth it. Like I've done really well afterwards, but like I'm not one of the top 3 most successful people on that blackjack team. Right, like I played with John Herstick, who started SolidWorks, and Yi-Chun Lee, who's an LP, actually started Unica, took it public, sold to IBM. Like we've had very successful entrepreneurs in the group, and so it was cool. I'm glad I did it. Right, like learned a lot. It was my first startup. Oh, and after playing for the first year, the group split up, and I ended up like running one of the teams. I was like essentially like the president of one of the teams, or at least one of the core people.
So do you consider that your initiation into entrepreneurship in essence?
No, it was just my first startup. It's what it was. Like, it was a company. Like, there's really nothing more to say. It's not the best company, but it was also a fund, I would say. It was a form of a fund. We had investors, people who played, and it was legit. Like, the only thing it didn't have was we didn't create any value. So it was like a hedge fund rather than an equity fund, right? In that we just traded. We made money. The casinos kicked us out eventually when they realized how much money we were making. They weren't always very nice about it. We did it legally, so they couldn't get us into any kind of trouble. But nevertheless, they never thanked us for beating them, right? So the only point was to take their money. It's much more rewarding, of course, to have customers that you serve and to actually get money for creating something of value, right? So that was a big thing that was missing, and where I kind of regret spending quite as much time as I have. And also, it just wasn't that interesting, right? Like, the internet's more interesting. But it was some good learning lessons for sure, in both team building and just being very quantitative and objective about assessing, risk, and making investments, more objectively, I guess.
All right, so switching gears, we're going to go through our 4 standard questions, and we're looking forward to hearing your answers. Our first question is our NVCA question. So the National Venture Capital Association advocates for public policy that supports the venture community and the American entrepreneurial ecosystem. If there was one thing that you would change about the VC industry, or one policy that you would advocate for, what would it be?
The thing that comes to mind is the immigration-related policy, of course. Obviously, we want people to be allowed to enter the country. And actually, we do better as a fund if it's hard to enter the country, because the more challenges people overcome, right, the more of an investment thesis it is. If it was super easy, it wouldn't be as good. The filter wouldn't work, but it's the right thing to do. And so the one policy change that always that I would really love to see, that I don't think we will, but I would love to. I get rubbed the wrong way when people ask me to comment on the latest, Biden, former, I guess, well, still current Biden administration, rule change to allow more educated H-1B, this or that, entrepreneurial visa. And I'm always like, yeah, I guess it's better than not letting them in. But I always have a bad feeling about it, because I fundamentally don't believe that we as Americans have any goddamn right to ask the question whether these immigrants are good for our economy. I mean, yeah, they're very good for our economy. Like, it's obviously create a lot of jobs, and whatever crime happens is a tiny, tiny fraction of like the wealth creation. But that's not the point. I think what makes America great is its founding principles and the belief that, like, all people, now it's people, right, are created equal, right? We should have the same rights. It shouldn't matter what color skin you have when you're born. It shouldn't matter what it says in your passport when you're born. What the heck does it matter? And that's what will make us great. It's just letting that go and not asking those questions. So the specific answer is that I would love to advocate for a policy of totally, well, I wouldn't say totally open, but a border where admission is only predicated on security, safety, or an idea that you're not going to come and cause harm, right? I've learned from supporting the war, Ukraine, and its efforts to fight the Russian aggression, that, like, you don't really want to have an open border that tanks roll across. Like, you do have to have some limitations, and you don't necessarily have to provide tremendous benefits. You shouldn't take money away from people who live here, right, to support others arriving. But anyone who comes without a threat and without like an immediate financial burden, who, let's say, has a round trip ticket in case things don't work out, like, beyond that, there's no more questions that need to be asked. So that's what I'd love to see. It's just a policy that allows people to enter and assumes that they'll create value, because people are generally good. People create opportunities, right? And we should let them in. That's my view.
Number 2 is, if you weren't a VC investor and money wasn't a concern, what career would you have?
Well, see, this is the thing. I am a VC investor, but money isn't a concern. am absolutely sure. I would be the same thing. I mean, if I wasn't a VC investor, I'd be a investor who was, out of my own family office. That would be like an angel investor, but I would still have the team. I would try to find a way to motivate and attract the kind of team that I have now, which is incredible. So I think I have my perfect job, right? And it's what I would do if I was on vacation. I would do this. Like, I love doing it, right? Yeah, I mean, I could say I'd be a teacher, because like the most exciting part about the job is when you get to mentor, but it wouldn't be true. I really want to do some version of what I do today. I love it.
Okay, so so number 2 would be a teacher, though.
I suppose, if you insist. I would be an angel investor, which is what I thought I'd always remain. I don't see myself doing too much else, honestly.
So not going back to the blackjack route.
God, no, that was terrible. That was like absolutely pointless. Like, the only satisfaction was proving that we were smarter than a bunch of people who weren't particularly smart to begin with. Like, it was cool to know that I can do it, right? It was a neat thing to have done, but it's not, I can't spend my life like just moving money from one bucket to another, that I have more control. Like, that's mine instead of theirs. Like, that's just pointless, right? Like, you have to serve somebody, you have to create value. I couldn't do that. No, I couldn't do that.
Okay. No, I wasn't sure if like craps might have been on the bucket list too. I wasn't sure. Anyways.
No, and it wasn't about the game. Like, I didn't gamble. I've never gambled. Like, I can't enjoy myself in a casino. Like, it was a job. It was routine. It was detail oriented. And I learned the game as part of learning how the team works. I never played it recreationally. I have other recreational hobbies, like flying a helicopter or kite surfing or whatever, riding my electric unicycle. I like things, but not that. No, not for me.
Cool background story though. Number 3 is, who is someone that you look up to and why?
I've been taking Ukrainian lessons. I kind of wanted to learn a language because my wife, who I also look up to a lot, it started with my help, started this massive nonprofit in Ukraine a couple of years ago when this big war started, and she dedicated her whole life to it. But anyway, I felt compelled to learn the language. I speak Russian from being born in Moscow, but I actually feel Ukrainian. I am really, like, my background is more from there, like grandparents and whatnot.
What part, out of curiosity?
The parts near Kiev, Zhytomyr, Kiev region. Since I occasionally went there and needed to learn the language because I didn't want to be speaking Russian right now, and not everyone speaks English. And plus, it's just a beautiful language, it turns out. So anyway, I've been learning it over a platform called Preply, it was actually a Ukrainian company where I was an early, maybe even the first angel investor. That's now quite a large company, like thousands of people work for them and whatnot, and vast numbers of tutors and students all over the world. I think they're a global market leader in online marketplaces for that. But anyway, the teacher is a young woman in Ukraine. She was in France when she started teaching me and went back and forth, but now she's just living in Kiev, and it's pretty hard, right? Like, taking a lot of risk, and in her mid-20s. And I'm just amazed when she asked me how my day goes, and I'm like, oh, well, the air conditioner broke or something. And like, they bombed the children's hospital. And of course, she's like, well, so what? I was like, yeah, I went there, I tried to help. We removed some rubble and pulled out some babies. And then, the guys who did better than me took over. And then I just got them some drinks, and then we played some music. And yeah, it was all right. Like, people who just remain optimistic in the face of like tremendous pressure and adversity, find time to volunteer constantly. It's just like that it's people like her and people like her, right? It's these optimistic young people who believe in a better world and who do something about it, and who seem to have no fear, as far as I can tell.
That's a great story. I'm sure she'll be very happy to hear you say that. Do you want to plug your wife's nonprofit?
Yeah, it's called See Forward, SEE-forward.org. And what it's doing now is actually running a summer program in the mountains in Western Ukraine in August that I'll be joining as well for a few days to build out like leadership capabilities in women like my teacher is, but slightly younger than her, who have been volunteering already, like when they were in high school, and who want to like be inspired by other stories. So we'll fly in a bunch of successful people, mostly women, like who are like maybe in their 30s and 40s, who are still not too old, can still relate to them and can inspire them and expand their horizons and help them in various ways. But it's before that, originally the thing was called Cash for Refugees, and her and I flew to the border with Romania on the second day of the war and started handing out cash because we couldn't think of anything else to do. And plus I had the blackjack experience, right? Cash was natural. And then we kind of did that, didn't have any more cash, flew back, and on the plane back, like put up a Facebook post, raised a lot of money. It went viral, right? Like ultimately several million, and then she set up groups of volunteers to first do it at the border, then to enter the country, and then basically funded, I think it was like 17,000 families, face-to-face interviews, record their stories on the ground in villages all over Ukraine, people who were displaced by the war, from the front lines to other regions, like old people, women with young children, and then raise the money to transfer like financial support payments directly to them in local currency. That was the organization for most of the time, and more recently it kind of pivoted towards these more, I would say, scalable in a sense, the high impact, more concentrated programs to help a smaller number of people, but more intensely.
Oh, sorry, what was it again?
SEC-forward.org is kind of the new name.
My family's Odessa and Lviv, so I might, and Ukrainian is top on my list to learn, although I would imagine you're going to have a way easier time with a background in Russian.
No, but you're younger than me, so like it gets harder with age. It's probably maybe about even. I could recommend a teacher. Yeah, absolutely, you should do it. I love Odessa. I've been to Lviv. It's an amazing country, and I really hope. I believe it'll somehow prevail. It's hard, I don't know how, but I believe it'll prevail because it's on the side of good, right? Like it really is.
Well, exactly. Number 4 is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I mean, there was some very actionable, specific bits of advice that is super easy to give a founder. So like as a founder, like focus on one thing, pick the thing that's interesting and just do that, cut everything else, right? Stuff like that is often quite obvious, but very difficult to see when it's about you.
Yeah.
But, I got some really great advice actually about when I was already starting a VC fund about setting up like a foundation separately from, like before we did this Ukrainian nonprofit, we had a one-way foundation set up like as a donor advised fund. And we pledged some of our future carry, to the foundation to help. And then it will just distribute money to like organizations that help refugees, like immigrants who are needy. And doing it, the advice was to do it like ahead of time. Naturally, I was thinking eventually doing it anyway. I'm not planning to leave money to my kids. I like the idea of, giving money away to charitable causes, ultimately, after I die, right? And somewhat today, but more after I die. But doing it ahead of time actually helped the fund as well, because it helped kind of define a fund as something I didn't have to compromise between the desire to help immigrants and investing in the best ones. Like we just invest in the best ones. The fund's impact will be that when we are well known, successful, like viewed as some sense a top tier organization, our very existence and having gotten there by investing in immigrant founders will contribute to conversations, right? The narrative around like issues like Brexit or walls with Mexico or whatever, right? It'll be an argument. So that's the way we want to make impact. And the path to it is just to have outsized returns. So we don't invest in poor needy immigrants who need our help. We invest in the top founders who happen to be immigrants, and we get to be on their cap table because our drive and our belief in this whole philosophy earns their respect and helps us deliver more value, and therefore we have the Pathfinder Collective and et cetera, so we get to be there, but separately we have the foundation for the philanthropic work, just to make it very clear what the fund doesn't do, because there's just many organizations that do make that compromise and we don't.
Right.
So that was good advice too. I know I gave you several answers, but hey.
Oh, great. The more and merrier. No, thank you.
Semyon, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time, and we enjoyed learning about you and One Way Ventures.
Yeah, thanks for including me. It's great. I love the spontaneous, see what happens kind of conversational style. It's great. Thank you.